Beauty from the Shelf is a podcast where industry experts fill in the gaps integral to growth for early stage beauty founders and brands. Today, I am joined by John Peine. He's the head of sales at Uncommon, a boutique retail sales brokerage focused on DTC brands. We had a fantastic conversation, and here's just a snippet from what we talked about.
Now it's all about what is your social following? As a merchant, am I seeing you show up in my social scrolls? So is it with my people? Is it with my tribe of key opinion leaders? And if so, you have a chip, chair, and a chance. And that is fundamentally different from the way things were, as you said, back in 2015, when it was, hey, I'm going to go out to this cool dinner and post my dinner plate on Instagram. It's really about life becoming digital first.
Let me tell you a little bit more about John. John spent the first 15 years of his career at Target. Fun fact, that's actually how John and I met. He was a former manager of mine. In 2019, John left Target and started his own probiotic brand called Friska. And at its peak, the brand was in 20,000 doors across retailers. He sold the brand in 2022 and ended up joining Uncommon as the head of sales. John's someone who loves consumer brands. He loves Target. He's been in retail for a minute, and so he's really someone who's able to talk about the different changes that have happened across the retail landscape across the years. I'm really excited for you all to hear some of the differences that John is going to talk about today with launching a brand today versus what might have worked in the past. Before we get into the episode, I want to make sure we take a brief moment to thank the sponsor for the Beauty from the Shelf podcast, the Emerson Group. Thank you to the Emerson Group for sponsoring the Beauty from the Shelf podcast. With your support, we're able to continue to help early stage brands get the tips and tools to help grow from 0 to 20 million. And with that, let's go ahead and get right into the episode. Let's dive in. So I'm really excited to have you here on the podcast, John, because you are a unicorn in the sense that you're a former merchant, right? I mean, you were my boss back when I was at Target, so...
I didn't know if we were going to talk about that or not.
Felt fitting to mention that actually worked under you or worked with you. It was very collaborative. Really enjoyed being on your team. We did work together. But you have this retail experience. You also have this experience as a brand founder. And you're also a retail veteran. Like, you started at Target as an analyst, moved up to become a buyer, to be a divisional, founded Friska, as we heard you say, and now you're the head of sales at Uncommon. And I know that there's been a lot of things that have changed across the time that you've been in retail. And so I'm excited to have a conversation around some of these new norms at retail and just to discuss how some of that has changed business, how merchants look at brands, how rep groups might look at brands, all of those things. So let's get right into it. From your perspective, how have the dynamics of retail or entering the retail space changed specifically for emerging brands?
I mean, post-COVID, like beyond retail, everything changed. I have 4 kids. I had a 6-year-old that was attending class through a computer screen. Like, that would have never been thought of in our family, at least pre-pandemic. And I think that's important to tee up because obviously there have been seismic changes in consumer retail, in brick and mortar retail, but really they're within the lens of so much change in overall lives. But that being said, shopping behavior has, as I said, experienced a seismic shift post-COVID. Consumers' willingness to try new brands has never been higher. I think a big piece of that is from being at home during the pandemic, and a number of consumers that maybe had not shopped online or were not willing to go online as their first choice had no choice but to do that. I was part of a group through Scott Emerson called the Future of Commerce Initiative out at the Harvard Faculty Club. And one thing that we talked about was the acceleration and the adoption and when things were going to happen. And the reality is 7 years of expected retail adoption took place over 2 months during COVID. And that really turned the retail landscape upside down. And in so doing, it really lowered the bar for new brands to get in. Because as long as you could put together a direct-to-consumer website or have a savvy launch plan on Amazon, anyone that had a viable product that, passed the approvals of required guidelines, whether it be FDA or otherwise, it really lowered the bar to present new products to consumers. And then with that, you see a ton of success for brands that have mastered the ability to market on social media. And that coalescence of social commerce, of a consumer's willingness to adopt new brands online has really made for an interesting environment the last 3 or 4 years.
Those are some really interesting perspectives. Do you think that merchants are looking at brands differently because there are so many brands that are popping up? Like, I remember looking at new brands back in 2015 and it felt special because it's like, oh my gosh, a new brand. Someone's been investing in this idea. I'm so excited to jump on it. And now it's like new brands pop up every day. So I'm curious how, or if you think that merchants look at new brands differently because of some of the things that you mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, it's the old adage of, CBS, Young Sheldon, the number one comedy on TV, right? Like, it is a TV station telling you what their number one show is. That was a popular commercial in the 90s, early 2000s. Now it's all about what is your social following? As a merchant, am I seeing you show up in my social scrolls? And if so, is it with my people? Is it with my tribe of key opinion leaders? And if so, you have a chip, chair, and a chance. And that is fundamentally different from the way things were, as you said, back in 2015, when it was, hey, I'm going to go out to this cool dinner and post my dinner plate on Instagram. It's really about life becoming digital first, which in many ways is somewhat concerning. But in the retail landscape, it is a complete pivot and, something that an astute merchant has to be paying attention to.
That's real. That's really good. So I'd love to hear from you, just kind of pivoting a little bit off of that, based on all of the things that you're seeing, new brands entering the market, you working with founders at Uncommon and being a founder yourself. What would you say are the top 3 to 5 things that are needed now to scale successfully at retail?
I mean, the big things are make sure that you have your bankroll secure. Whatever you think you need to raise double that. Because it's a big, bad world out there, and there are a bevy of expenses from a marketing perspective, cost of doing business with retailers. You have to be able to withstand downturns in your business. And to that end, like there's an adage of aim small, miss small, aim big, miss big. If you're rolling out in a couple hundred store test, it will likely afford you the ability to miss the mark on a couple things and still be viable. If you roll out full chain with 15 items, you're making a pretty big gamble. And again, that does sound cliche, but you have to be 100% certain that you understand your product market fit. Scaling too quickly can be an absolute death blow to brands. And what has been increasingly successful in the past 3, 5, 7 years is launching DTC, scaling efficiently, minimum viable product, and then understanding that product market fit hand in glove before going into the incredibly expensive world of retail, because you are going to need more funding than you think you do. And having those learnings under your belt really ensures better chances for success.
That's good stuff. And I know a lot of times folks will see a PO or see big numbers and they'll want to launch right away. Can you talk a little bit more about why that scale can be a death blow, as you said, and why that's like a watch out?
It very much is a watch out. And I think personal experience, right? Like I had envisioned Friska to be a Whole Foods and Amazon launch. And I went to the Total Store Expo trade show in August of 2019. I remember it vividly. Had a conversation with the then chief merchant who introduced me to some people on his team. And before I knew it, I was flying out to Woonsocket to meet with CBS. Great merchandising team there. David Winter was a phenomenal partner helping to launch the brand Friska. He even said initially, he's like, you don't want to be in all stores. We want to grow this strategically. Fast forward to a month later, and it was, hey, we really like what we're seeing, and we want to make this the biggest bet that we have going in the OTC division for our 2020 launches. And then you start to put pen to paper and you become a little bit punch drunk on that opening PO of how much capital infusion that will put into your business. Obviously, we could not have predicted that COVID would hit mere weeks before launching the brand, and that turned everything upside down. That's for another conversation. But what comes with that, $4 million PO is $4 million of risk if your product doesn't sell. And unfortunately, we had about half of our portfolio that, for better or worse, just had failure to launch at CVS. And that was almost the death blow that I spoke about. Like, we were able to scramble and get scrappy and figure out a way to survive. But it really hampered our ability to market the way that we wanted to invest in the way that we wanted to, and put us behind the eight ball really before we launched.
That's real. And I think that it's so easy to get caught up on the numbers and just the success and the excitement, right? Because that's the thing that you want as a founder. You want that PO. And when you get it, it's like, yes, like, mama, I made it.
Yeah. And they were great partners. We had a phenomenal display in like 3,500 stores. We had an inline display in almost 7,500 stores. And the partnership was all there. Like, nobody could have predicted COVID. But even with that, it's like you see all of the assets that you're getting, and it's like, man, why is this not resonating more? But to what I spoke about at the top, like, everything changed in the blink of a 2-week lockdown that turned into an 18-month complete flip of how everyday life went about.
Yeah, that's so true. And we're still, as you said, like, facing some of the aftermath of that. And even as I think you talked a little bit about, what happened with Friska, but I can think about additional case studies, brands that you were even involved with launching, right? When you were on the merchant side, I think about, small brands that launched and built at big retail, thinking of Method, Welly, Honey Pot Company. And you're just not seeing those same success stories. You're not seeing the same success stories where you're seeing small brands scaling. And maybe some of it is that they're scaling a little bit more slowly. And so we haven't necessarily seen them IPO. But it seemed like these stories were happening all the time, in like every category, if you will. So I'm wondering, what do you think is driving some of these changes? Or, what are some of the brands that you're seeing that are scaling that you're like, this is how they did it, they're crushing it, and, it's a good case study?
I first have to acknowledge the slight humble brag with Honey Pot Company, because you were all over them early days, and obviously they went on to tremendous success. So congratulations to you, Monique, for helping them launch.
Thank you.
There are still dozens of them. We have a number of very successful brands at Uncommon that launched exclusively at Target outside of their brick and mortar. I think the biggest myth in retail is the overnight success. More common is the overnight success that was actually 7 years in the making. When I think about a brand like Liquid IV, they had a very fervent leadership team, core founder team. Brandon did a great job with that brand, but everyone thinks they launched in like 2018. No, they launched in 2012, and they scaled slowly. It was a bit unconventional in that Costco was actually one of their first big retailers, but they went on to tremendous success. And yes, they did end up in a Unilever portfolio, not an IPO. And I think IPOs, certainly not as common. Acquisition by large-scale private equity, very common. Acquisition by strategic CPG, somewhat common. But I think it's a little bit of a myth of the overnight success. Method, even when they launched at Target, they scaled the right way. They failed before they succeeded. They found packaging opportunities. They had a dish soap that was leaking on the top shelf that was ruining their beautiful display. But they were able to overcome that because they scaled appropriately and didn't go full chain out of the gate. On the flip side of that is another company that Eric Ryan was involved in with Ollie. That one was kind of a unicorn of scaling at mass and being successful right away. But there are a ton of brands that are seeing success. I think what's a little bit different is the role of direct to consumer, because you see a lot of brands. I can think of a couple right now: Athletic Greens, Armra, Seed, probiotic space. Like, there are these brands that are hitting very high numbers direct to consumer that are yet to have a brick and mortar presence. And I'd be surprised if, all three of those brands don't within the next 12 to 18 months, because, they've done a great job launching digitally. And it is just the right next step for them in their brand evolution. But it's all about getting in, and the myth of that overnight success being a little bit overblown, because usually there's a lot more behind it than what has been generally known to the public.
That's really good. And thanks for giving some of those examples, because I do think, to your point, that overnight success is a little bit of a myth. Everyone wants to hear that, like, get rich quick story. I've fallen for it too, but when you peel back the layers in most cases, there is a much longer story to it. And it wasn't overnight at all. It was maybe this was their third startup. So yeah, it might appear that the launch was successful, but they failed those 2 to 3 other times. And that's how they got here, right?
And even Honey Pot that you called out, like that was not overnight. You saw the beginning of that.
Yeah.
And now it's just easy to remember the end state, right? But there was a long road to get there. But once you plant the flag, it doesn't matter how long it took. If you made it, you made it.
Right. Do you think that there's a sweet spot in terms of revenue for brands that are DTC, but are looking to expand at retail to say you have enough scale based on your revenue, based on the number of consumers that you're reaching to say this is a good point to go to retail, like brick and mortar retail?
I don't think that revenue is the silver bullet by any means. I do think that what we have seen be successful in other studies that I've seen or brands that have recently launched be successful, it is fairly high. If you're hitting 50, 70, $100 million, I think it's a pretty safe bet that it's going to work. But I don't think that's a silver bullet. The other thing that is a really big record skip from direct to consumer in any online presence, be it Amazon or otherwise, from going to brick and mortar, is the fact that brick and mortar is set up with specific categories. And sometimes, as a merchant, what you want is a brand that's going to come in and not take someone else's share, but truly make the whole pie bigger. And typically that's with category incrementality with a new category. Launching a new category is much easier online where you don't have well-defined category definitions. And it's like, hey, this product is great for your overall wellness and nutrition, but should this go in vitamins? Should it go in active nutrition? Should it go in protein? For good or bad, there are these definitions that have been placed on categories at retail that can sometimes make it difficult to know how and when to launch. But, is there a specific number per se? Getting back to your question at hand, I don't think so. I think 10 million is probably where you'd want to start thinking about it. Obviously, the bigger, the better chances of success you'll have.
Thanks for sharing that, John. And so as we talk about that general revenue number, let's move and talk retail launch partners, because choosing that right brick and mortar retail launch partner is crucial. Can you talk a little bit about what founders should prioritize when they're selecting retailers for launch? What signals should they look for? What things should they be cautious of or push back on during this decision-making process?
The biggest thing is likely blinking lights obvious. Your brand is your biggest asset. So when you are looking for that retail partner, make sure that they are willing to highlight your brand, because if they believe in it, if they truly feel it's going to bring incremental consumers, incremental guests, incremental sales to their bottom line, they should be willing to help you showcase that brand, be it with secondary space, be it with inline displays or fixtures that clearly articulate your brand callouts. One of my favorite quotes is, I would have written you a shorter letter, but I didn't have the time. Don't want to say too much. What is the main reason for your brand's existence? And clearly articulate that. So ensuring that you're getting assets to build your brand both digitally and in store is very important. I'm biased. I think Target does this in a best-in-class fashion. It is what they have been known for. They've done it very well. The guest at Target comes into stores looking to discover new brands. And I think Target does a masterful job of curating their stores in the assortment to really bring the joy and the human element of a shopping experience. We talk about digital penetration. I led with that of how crazy the growth has been. The reality is 10 years from now, 2/3 of purchases will probably still be made in a store, right? That's going to be the biggest piece. And ensuring that you're getting that brand asset to ensure your brand is communicated to the consumers of those retailers is absolutely critically important.
Thank you for that. So let's go to that. We talked about good retail partners and what brands should look for, watch outs and things like that. For those brands that aren't ready for, I said a full store rollout, but let's say some brands might not even be ready for a big retailer like a Target, right? If you think about your big mass retailers, your Target, your Walmart, even include Meijer in there or your drugstores, what alternative paths or strategies would you recommend for brands that are looking to scale and expand within brick and mortar, but maybe aren't ready to go to big retail, because with big retail comes big expenses. And sometimes there are other avenues to kind of get your feet wet, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, I think the whole thing of where I started of like, if you aim small and miss, you miss small. If you aim small and win, yes, you win small, but then you scale. And if you aim big and win, great for you, but highly unlikely to happen. And I think just figuring out the right way to ensure that you have some proof of performance. Again, you need to be supremely confident that you have the market product fit, that it's there, and that you can strategically invest to grow it wherever you're launching. And even if you've been able to scale, call it 10 million, call it 100 million, whatever it is, whatever you've built in DTC, there has to be a willingness to drive that audience to your new retail partners. In the case of Uncommon, it is with Target. They are our only partner. And what we see is in talking to founders, both past and current, that are looking to launch coming up, we implore them, it is going to be incremental. There's this thought that, well, this is going to be cannibalistic. In reality, it's like the brick and mortar retail world opens up a whole new audience. I think the lowest incrementality rate I've seen on a brand that we represent is like 85%. Usually it's in the mid to high 90s. It is a completely different audience. But if they use the audience they already have and use them as key opinion leaders with their social circles, shout from the rooftops, now available at Target, they have social influence over those people that they interact with on a daily basis. All of those things help beyond social media, beyond paid retail media like Roundel and product ads through Citrus and Criteo. But being willing to invest in whatever those tools are, I'm obviously much more steeped in Target, Monique, so I can't speak to the Anthropologies of the world or things. Meyer's a great retailer for sure, and they have a lot of the same capabilities with digital marketing. But whoever that retail partner is, understand their playbook and do some digging and ask around of what parts of that playbook are truly going to drive growth, and some might just be pay to play. But utilizing all of the efforts that the brand has built first is tentpole number one.
That's really good. I also noticed that you're saying you need to be supremely confident. And there are a lot of brands that have been out there, but maybe they're thinking, hey, I'm scaling, I'm doing well. With everything that you said, give me an idea of, when you look at a brand, what kind of sales growth you're expecting, or what kind of numbers or trajectory you're seeing, just to give folks an idea of, like, it doesn't necessarily have to look like this, but this is one example of a brand that is probably ready to scale. They've seen 20% year over year growth, or the brand has seen really solid engagement on Instagram. Their Instagram following is growing at, 30% year over year. Like, can you give us some of those other metrics or things that you look at? You talked a little bit about revenue, but what some of those other things might be that brands might not realize are important factors to consider?
Yeah, I mean, there's, again, not a silver bullet. There's no one magic answer. But I would say that the brands that have seen slam dunk success, DTC to brick and mortar, minimally doubling year over year. And in some cases, there are brands that are seeing 200, 300% growth. This is not a brand that we represent. I want to call that out, but there's market data available. I think one of the best cases of DTC to brick and mortar conversion that I've ever seen is with Lumi Personal Care. They scaled rapidly. They had really good sustained growth. Again, that might be seen as a brand that's an overnight success, but it's been out for years and they built very strategically. And then when they went to roll out to brick and mortar, they had a very strategic hire of one of the best minds in consumer retail to lead their sales team. In looking at Target, I don't know the exact numbers. I think in the first year, they were approaching 9 figures in sales in year one. And I had some really, really successful launches when I was at Target, and they were less than a fifth of that. And that's just incredible. The marketing was masterful. You can't turn a corner, turn on a radio, enter a podcast, drive down an interstate without seeing a billboard. Like, Lumi has done a great job of building up sustainable growth, crushing DTC, and then absolutely knocking it out of the park with brick and mortar launch. I honestly could not think of a better case study to try to decompose than what they've done to see how they did it all.
That's really good. Thanks, John. Look, I'm so glad that we got a chance to sit down. I think the knowledge that you dropped is super helpful. So many founders want to just scale quickly, which I totally understand, or they feel like I've been doing this for 4 years. What's going on? But I think even, hitting on some of the numbers in terms of if you're doubling year over year, just knowing those are some metrics to, again, slam dunk success. And if you're growing at 10% and you're still at a base of even $1 million, maybe that's something for you to look back and say, we need a little bit more if we're going to be ready to scale at that size, or we need to make sure we find the right retail partner that is going to help and talk to us if we haven't necessarily figured out what that success metric is for us.
Yeah. And one other data point that I'd call out with that piece of other metrics that are good indicators, it's your purchase repeat rate. That can sometimes be hard to suss out when you have subscription-based businesses. But even that, like, people can cancel a subscription, right? So if you have subscription, what is your retention? It has to be probably 90 plus. And without that, your repeat rate should be minimally in the mid 30s. Because if you're not hitting that, you don't have a product that people are coming back to buy. So understanding that, yes, they got it the first time, but are they coming back? And that's another important metric that I should have called out.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Well, look, I just want to thank you again for coming on and sharing all of your knowledge. It's so good to hear from fellow, ex-merchants. But I say once you're a merchant, always a merchant, if it's in your heart.
We're in a club. I've been in this for 20 years now. I'm just a retail degenerate, CPG junkie, but I wouldn't have it any other way.
I love it. Thank you again to Peine for joining me on the podcast and talking a little bit about retail. As someone who is also a forever merchant, I totally nerd out on stuff like this and love conversations talking about retail, success stories, really peeling back the layers to share that no success truly happened overnight, but it's really about strategic choices in category, strategic choices in marketing, and even as we heard with the brief review of Lumi, strategic choices in having the right people on your team. If you found this episode helpful, I encourage you to share it with a colleague or friend. And if you don't mind, leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. It helps to ensure that the podcast continues to grow and gains visibility from other beauty and retail enthusiasts. As always, thank you for listening, and I'll catch you on the next episode. Bye.